Hello friends, welcome to Gnandip Academy's daily answer writing program. Today we are going to discuss a question from UPSC Means 2024. The question is on disaster management. With this question, you can understand that UPSC is going into more detailed analysis of concepts. The questions are more about how you have understood the concept. So there's one concept in disaster management, that is resilience. So the question is, what is disaster resilience? How is it determined? And describe various elements of resilience framework. Also mention the global targets of Sendai framework. Now this is a global framework on disaster management. So what are the targets of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction? The period of Sendai framework is from 2015 to 2030. Okay. Now if you look at the locus and focus part of this question, the question is very clear and direct. So all the parts of this question would come under focus. You are supposed to write on every part of the question that is asked here. Okay. So we'll begin with introduction. Now in this part, in introduction you will be defining, because it is straight away asked what is disaster resilience. You'll have to explain or define what is disaster resilience. Now there are two ways of how you would define resilience. One is without knowing any authentic source or any international organization defining it. And one is with knowing the organization. Now, for example, if you can write, first you're supposed to explain what is disaster risk resilience. Okay, in this answer, first part would be explain what is disaster resilience. Now, according to Hugo Framework for Action, what is Hugo Framework for Action? Of all the three conferences on disaster management that we have had, Hugo Framework was one before the Sendai Framework. So in Hugo Framework, the focus was on resilience. And this Hugo Framework had defined what disaster resilience is. So according to Hugo Framework, disaster resilience is the ability of individuals, communities or institutions to anticipate, withstand, adapt and recover from disasters. That is known as disaster resilience. Then also here you can briefly explain the importance of disaster management. That is what we can achieve by resilience, that is minimizing the socio-economic impact of disaster or reducing the vulnerability to disasters, and quicker recovery from disasters is what we can achieve. So this is how your introduction to this question should be. Now, going forward, the next focus was what are the determinants of resilience. So these are all the determinants through which we determine the resilience of the society, community or a group. Okay, first a determinant is the risk awareness. Okay, wherever you have disasters, there should be risk awareness or mapping of disasters. Now, for example, we have earthquake zone map in India. Likewise, we have maps of all the disasters in India. So that is one basic determinant of resilience. If you want to build resilience, you should first be aware of the disaster. Then second is preparedness and response capacity. How prepared is the community to disaster? A community which is prepared only can be a resilient community, or it can face disasters. So how prepared are you, or what is the response plan, or what is the capacity to respond to disasters is another determinant. Then robust infrastructure is another determinant of resilience. Social and economic condition of a particular region. Now, same kind of disaster would impact two different regions in a different way. Now, for example, floods in mountainous region or floods in plains would be two different scenarios. Okay. And the socio and economic condition of the region also is going to impact. Now, for example, earthquake in Japan and earthquake in India. The socio-economic stature of this community is going to be impacted, and the resilience also will be decided based on that. Then adaptation and learning is one example. Now, we have cyclones on all the coastal areas in India, but out of those, Odisha is always well prepared. It is more resilient to cyclones, right? So this is why, because they have focused on adaptation and learning. So this is one determinant of resilience, and one is community engagement. How much do you engage with the community? Because in disaster management or the disaster management cycle that we study under this, community engagement is one of the most important factor of disaster resilience. If there is no community engagement, the community cannot be resilient to the disaster, and Japan is the best example of community engagement in disaster management. Okay, so these are some of the determinants of resilience. Then we have what are the elements of a resilience framework. If you want to make a framework of resilience, what should be the essential parts of those? The first is the risk assessment. Okay, you should be well aware of what is the risk of a particular disaster. If you identify the risk, only then can you reduce the risk. Okay, so this is the most important element, that is risk assessment of any disaster. Then there is prevention and mitigation. Okay, you know for a reason that Delhi, if it comes in zone 5 of earthquake, then you should have certain building codes there. What kind of structures are being built should be laid down. Okay, so there should be preparation, prevention and mitigation as well. Then you should have preparedness in place. For example, you should have plans, you should have training, you should have early warning systems in place. Okay, that becomes an element of resilience framework. Recovery and restructuring is another important part of resilience framework, where you focus on rebuilding the infrastructure. Okay, a disaster strikes, and if you cannot build back the infrastructure, that is not known as resilience. So building back of infrastructure or restoring livelihoods which have been damaged by earthquakes or any other disaster is also part of resilience framework. Then institutional coordinations, for example, we have NDMA in India. Okay, of all the structure or 3-tier structure that we have in India for disaster management, NDMA brings about coordination between all these layers of administrating disasters in India. And last is the knowledge and information sharing that we have of disasters. Okay, some traditional knowledge to counter disasters is also being used in modern day resilience frameworks. So these are some of the important points here. Then the last point is much easier. What are the global targets of Sendai framework 2015 to 2030? Okay, we have 7 targets under Sendai framework. 4 targets speak of reducing certain things and 3 targets speak of increasing certain things. So what are the first 4 points? What does it want to reduce? It wants to reduce global disaster mortality by 2030. Reduce disaster mortality. Then reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030. Then reduce the direct disaster related economic losses. Just focus on these terms: number of affected people, economic losses, disaster mortality. And last is reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure. So the global targets are to reduce disaster mortality, reduce the number of affected people, reduce economic losses, and reduce the damages to critical infrastructure. At the same time, we also have 3 points where we are supposed to increase certain things. First is increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. Sendai framework says that every country should have its own disaster risk reduction strategy by 2020. Okay. Then it also says enhance international cooperation to developing countries. Developing countries would not have the means and resources to face the disasters or overcome the disasters as like the developed countries. So it promotes more international cooperation. It also focuses on increasing the availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information. Okay, so these are some of the targets which we have under Sendai framework for 2015 to 2030. Now, when we are concluding the answer here, you should again emphasize why disaster resilience is important, or how the increasing climate volatility is resulting into increasing disasters. Here we are trying to emphasize on why resilience is important, because number of disasters is increasing because of global warming and climate change. Okay, then disaster resilience is essential to avoid physical, economic and environmental losses that come from disasters. Okay, so you are giving this reason which makes resilience more important, right? Then also go into the future or be futuristic when you think of the solutions, that global cooperation through frameworks such as Sendai framework can help countries to reduce disaster risks and ensure sustainable development. Okay, so you are also emphasizing what is given in the question. You're also giving the reasons behind why there is increase in disasters, and you're also looking a forward-looking point also is given that there should be more and more global cooperation like that in Sendai framework. So that's all for today. Thank you. Have a nice day.